I'm going to describe just a little bit of the impacts that we have begun to document north of the Tappan Zee and the upper part of the estuary. This is a preliminary data set from USGS about the height of the storm tide from Sandy. And you can see here's the battery. These are river miles along the bottom, and here's the battery with water elevation about 9 feet. Down here is the predicted astronomic tide. So about 9-foot storm surge, leading to a 12 or 13-foot storm tide. But that quickly decayed. The surge height over the astronomic tide quickly decayed, but then stayed very constant, or slowly rising up to Albany here. So we had a storm surge of about 6.5 feet leading, which came in almost perfectly timed with the high tide, leading to storm tides at elevations above NABD 88, mean low water of 9.5 feet. These were the previous storm records here. Sorry, this pointer's not really bright, but these are previous storm records down here due to Hurricane Irene. Or water height records. So this was clearly the storm of record in places like Piermont, West Point, Poughkeepsie. It was far below the storm of record, which was Irene, in Albany. And that reflects something that many people have remarked on, which is the difference between this storm and Hurricane Irene and the lack of freshwater inputs, which drove an incredible water level event on the upper part of the Hudson, 15 feet above mean low water in Albany. Our estimates are that this inundated over 40,000 acres of shoreline land along the Hudson, which is a remarkable number of places. Interestingly, though, while this data was created after the storm, those of us who knew where to look were watching the storm surge predictions for over 48 hours before the storm, and were able to help our organizations and the people we knew at least prepare appropriately. I'll tell you in a second about a meeting that we had just about 10 days after the storm, where many of the mayors from the Westchester waterfront were in attendance, and I asked them how many of their communities knew where to access the real-time projections, and no hands went up. So we have a real disconnect between emergency preparation efforts and the data that would inform those efforts for the Hudson River estuary, and probably for other parts of the metropolitan area. As people have mentioned, there were hundreds of small spills and CSO overflows. This was a non-point source disaster for the estuary. These are just pinpoints of the EPA permitted facilities that have toxic materials that are probably near or within the flood zone. So hundreds of those places. We had lots of reports of fuel tanks that became buoyant and popped out of the ground, releasing material. We had oil spills in places like Kingston. We had wastewater treatment plants that were inundated in places like Kingston and a few other places. The rail corridor flooded. This is the Metro North line just south of Croton, and the water. This was not during the height of the water. The water was at its highest about 12 hours later. So that the water line level was up probably well over the bridge, and their facility, their repair facility in Croton, was inundated, and so whether there were toxic releases there, we're not sure yet. Many marinas, dozens of marinas along the river were inundated, and of course many of those have fuel storage facilities and other and oil facility, oil storage. So lots of those were flooded. This is, I think that's in Ossining. And many new waterfront developments were inundated. Places like Tarrytown, Peekskill, those places where new developments have just been recently sited in that zone. We've been doing a lot of work along the estuary for the last couple of years trying to project and model sea level rise for the estuary. This is up just south of Albany, and these colors along the left-hand side are inundation depths. And so, up to 54 inches potentially by the 2080, 2090 time period, and this begins to look like these are all permanently underwater, over 8,000 acres. So, a significant portion of these flooded zones we think are going to be continuously flooded in the coming decades. And one of the things that we're starting to look at with respect to Sandy is the number of brownfield sites, both remediated and unremediated, that were underwater during Sandy, particularly with respect to the way that our remediation guidelines work, where we are typically removing some amount of fill and putting back some clean amount of fill. But if these sites are continuously inundated or frequently inundated, whether there's going to be flushing of those contaminants is an open question. So together with a lot of different partners, Scenic Hudson and the state DEC and DOS have been working on creating kind of a storm surge and sea level rise adaptation plan that incorporates protecting the right coastal lands and creating resilient parks. This is Long Dock Beacon, a brand new kayak facility that Scenic Hudson just built that performed really, really well. It stayed in place. And identifying the places where restoration or removal of shoreline barriers will give us the biggest payoff in terms of these coastal resilience zones. So I just wanted to mention, too, that we've been doing a lot of outreach, especially since Irene, on how to build resilient waterfronts. And I have to say that after Sandy, things got a lot more interesting in the community outreach realm. And as I mentioned, right after we had a meeting in Peekskill, attended by almost every mayor in Westchester at one of these Revitalizing Hudson Riverfront forums. And all of them are now taking a look at how their waterfronts can maintain public access and at the same time provide these storm buffering zones. So I think we have a real window of opportunity with the electeds, not just in the New York, New Jersey harbor, but up and down the estuary, to have some really positive forward-looking planning. And we've just launched some sea level rise task force initiatives in other communities. One of the things that we hear a lot from electeds and municipal officials is the need for data that allows them to both deal with the short-term events like Sandy, but also the long-term planning goals. And so this is just a screenshot of a website we're about to launch that will allow communities up and down the river to visualize both sea level rise and storm surge zones, and to begin planning appropriately. And this is the kind of information that we heard it over and over, and so now we're building it. But I think there's an opportunity for the management committee or the whole program to focus on giving people the long-term tools, not just the short-term tools, to avoid the kind of impacts we saw in this stuff.
Thank you, Sasha.